Karen's heart raced as the bulldozer's engine roared to life. She watched in horror as the massive machine began tearing up the pristine lawn she had meticulously maintained for years. "Stop, what are you doing?" she screamed, rushing towards the operator's cab, but her cries were drowned out by the deafening sound of the machinery. The bulldozer continued its relentless advance, ripping through flower beds and shrubs with ease. Karen's hands trembled as she frantically waved her arms, desperately trying to get the operator's attention. "This is my property. You have no right to do this," she yelled, her voice cracking with anguish. Suddenly, the bulldozer lurched to a halt, and the operator emerged from the cab, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Sorry, ma'am, but the Homeowners Association has approved this land for a new pool access pathway. You're just going to have to deal with it," he said, casually lighting a cigarette. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "The HOA? But they can't just take my land without my consent. This is outrageous," she exclaimed, her voice quivering with a mixture of fear and outrage. The operator shrugged, taking a long drag on his cigarette. "That's not my problem. I'm just following orders. If you have an issue, you'll have to take it up with the HOA." With that, he climbed back into the cab and resumed the destruction, leaving Karen standing helplessly in the wake of the bulldozer's relentless advance. As she watched her beloved garden being reduced to rubble, tears of frustration and helplessness began to stream down her face. "This can't be happening," she muttered to herself, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I won't let them do this to me." Determined to stop the destruction, Karen rushed towards the fence that lined the edge of her property, intent on confronting the HOA president, a woman she had clashed with before over petty neighborhood disputes. Little did she know that this confrontation would lead her down a path of no return, one that would ultimately test the very limits of her sanity. Karen's feet pounded against the pavement as she hurried towards the HOA president's house, her mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, fear, and a sense of betrayal all bubbled to the surface, fueling her determination to put a stop to the destruction unfolding on her property. As she approached the pristine, well-manicured lawn of the HOA president's home, Karen's eyes narrowed with determination. She knew this woman, Susan, all too well, a self-appointed gatekeeper of the neighborhood's standards, forever criticizing Karen's garden and finding fault with the color of her front door. Without hesitation, Karen marched up the driveway and pounded on the front door, her fist hammering against the polished wood with a sense of urgency. After a brief pause, the door swung open, revealing Susan's perfectly coiffed appearance. "Karen," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "what a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "You know damn well why I'm here, Susan," Karen spat, her eyes ablaze with fury. "Your precious HOA is destroying my lawn to build a pool access pathway, and I won't stand for it." Susan's expression shifted to one of feigned concern. "Oh my, I had no idea. That must be simply dreadful for you," she said, her tone laced with sarcasm. "But you know, the HOA has a responsibility to ensure the community's best interests are served. Sometimes, individual preferences must take a backseat to the greater good." Karen's jaw tightened, her knuckles turning white as she clenched her fists. "The greater good. This is my home, my property. You have no right to just waltz in and bulldoze my land without my consent." Susan's eyes narrowed, a hint of annoyance flickering across her features. Now, Karen, let's not be too hasty. I'm sure we can come to some sort of reasonable compromise. After all, we're all neighbors here, and we should be looking out for one another, don't you think?" Karen's response was quick and unwavering. "There will be no compromise, Susan. This ends now." With those words, she turned on her heel and stormed back towards her property, her mind already whirring with plans to put a stop to the HOA's destructive plans. As Karen marched back towards her home, her mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions and strategies. She knew that the HOA, with its deep pockets and political connections, would be a formidable opponent, but she was determined to do whatever it took to protect her property. Reaching the edge of her lawn, Karen watched in horror as the bulldozer continued its relentless assault, plowing through the carefully tended flowerbeds and shrubs that had been her pride and joy for years. The sight only served to stoke the flames of her determination, and she knew she had to act quickly. Scanning the area, Karen's eyes landed on a stack of old tires that had been left behind by a previous contractor. An idea began to take shape in her mind, and without hesitation, she sprung into action. Grabbing the tires, Karen began dragging them towards the path of the bulldozer, creating a makeshift barrier. The operator, caught off guard by her sudden intervention, slammed on the brakes, sending the massive machine lurching to a halt just inches from the obstruction. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" the operator shouted, his face contorted with a mix of confusion and anger. Karen stood her ground, her chin held high. "I'm putting a stop to this destruction," she declared, her voice firm and unwavering. "You're not going to bulldoze my property without a fight." The operator scowled, his grip tightening on the controls. "Look, lady, I'm just following orders. If you've got a problem with it, take it up with the HOA, but I'm not going to let you interfere with my work." "Oh, I'll be taking it up with the HOA, all right," Karen retorted, her eyes narrowing with determination. "And you can be sure that this isn't the last they'll hear from me." As the standoff continued, Karen knew that she was treading on dangerous ground. She had drawn a line in the sand, and she was prepared to defend her property at all costs. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder if she had bitten off more than she could chew. The tense standoff between Karen and the bulldozer operator dragged on, neither side willing to back down. Karen stood her ground, her arms crossed defiantly, as the operator glared at her from the cab of the massive machine. Suddenly, the sound of approaching voices broke the silence, and Karen's heart sank as she recognized the figures making their way towards the scene: Susan, the HOA president, and a group of her loyal followers. "What's going on here?" Susan demanded, her tone sharp and authoritative. The operator seized the opportunity, quickly filling her in on the situation. "This woman is interfering with the HOA-approved construction project," he reported, pointing an accusatory finger at Karen. Susan's gaze shifted to Karen, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of irritation and triumph. "Is this true, Karen? Are you deliberately obstructing the work of the HOA?" Karen stood her ground, refusing to back down. "Yes, I am," she declared, her voice unwavering. "This is my property, and I won't let you bulldoze it without my consent." Susan's lips curled into a condescending smile. "Oh, Karen, you really don't understand how this works, do you? The HOA has the authority to make decisions that benefit the entire community, even if they conflict with the wishes of individual homeowners." Karen's eyes widened with outrage. "Benefit the community? This is nothing more than a power grab. You're using your position to trample all over my rights as a homeowner." Susan's expression hardened, and she turned to the group of HOA members standing behind her. "All right, everyone, you heard the lady. She's refusing to cooperate with the HOA's plans. I'm afraid we'll have to take more drastic measures." Karen's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the group of HOA members begin to move towards her, their faces set with determination. She knew she was outnumbered and outmatched, but she refused to back down. As the HOA members closed in, Karen braced herself for the confrontation, knowing that the battle for her property was about to take an even more intense and desperate turn. The air was thick with tension as the group of HOA members surrounded Karen, their eyes narrowed with a mixture of anger and triumph. Karen stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest, as she faced down the formidable force that had descended upon her property. "All right, Karen, let's make this simple," Susan said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You can either step aside and let us proceed with the construction, or we'll be forced to remove you from the premises." Karen's gaze darted between the HOA members, her mind racing to find a way out of the predicament. She knew that she was outmatched and outgunned, but the thought of surrendering her property to the HOA was simply unacceptable. "I'm not going anywhere," Karen declared, her voice quivering with a mixture of fear and determination. "This is my home, and I won't let you take it from me." Susan's expression hardened, and she gestured to the group of HOA members. "Very well then, you leave us no choice." Without warning, the HOA members surged forward, their hands reaching out to grab Karen. Panic seized her, and she lashed out, her nails scratching at the face of the nearest assailant. The man recoiled with a yelp of pain, and the rest of the group hesitated, taken aback by Karen's fierce resistance. Seizing the opportunity, Karen darted towards her house, her mind racing as she searched for a way to escape the onslaught. As she reached the front door, she heard the sound of heavy footsteps behind her, and she knew that the HOA members were in hot pursuit. Fumbling with her keys, she managed to unlock the door and slam it shut just as the first of the HOA members reached the porch. Panting heavily, Karen leaned against the door, her hands trembling. She had to find a way to stop the HOA's destruction of her property, but the realization that she was now trapped in her own home only served to heighten her sense of desperation. Karen's heart pounded in her chest as she listened to the muffled voices and pounding footsteps outside her front door. The HOA members were not going to give up easily, and she knew that she had to act quickly to secure her property and her safety. Glancing around her living room, Karen's eyes landed on the old baseball bat her husband had used to play catch with their children years ago. Without hesitation, she grabbed the bat and gripped it tightly, her knuckles turning white. Cautiously, she inched towards the door, peering through the peephole to assess the situation. The HOA members were still gathered on her porch, their faces contorted with frustration and anger. Taking a deep breath, Karen swung the door open, brandishing the bat in front of her. "Get off my property," she shouted, her voice laced with a mixture of fear and fury. The HOA members took a step back, momentarily caught off guard by her sudden and aggressive action. However, their surprise quickly gave way to determination, and they began to advance towards her once again. Karen swung the bat, striking one of the members in the shoulder. The man yelped in pain and stumbled backwards, clutching his injured limb. The others hesitated, their eyes widening with a newfound respect for Karen's willingness to fight back. "I'm warning you, get off my land, or I'll use this bat on all of you," Karen threatened, her voice trembling slightly. Susan, the HOA president, stepped forward, her expression a mix of shock and outrage. "Karen, this is completely unacceptable behavior. You're attacking your neighbors and disrupting the community's progress. You leave us no choice but to call the authorities." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she tightened her grip on the bat. "Go ahead, call the cops. I'll be sure to tell them all about your illegal attempt to seize my property without my consent." Susan's face flushed with anger, and she turned to the group. "Let's go. We'll deal with this through proper legal channels." With that, the HOA members reluctantly retreated, leaving Karen standing on her porch, bat in hand, her chest heaving with a mixture of fear and triumph. As the HOA members retreated, Karen felt a sense of relief wash over her, but she knew that this was far from over. Susan and the HOA were not the types to back down easily, and she was certain that they would retaliate in some form or another. Stepping back inside her home, Karen carefully locked the door and made her way to the living room, the old baseball bat still gripped tightly in her hand. She sank into her favorite armchair, her mind racing with the events of the day. What had started as a routine day had quickly spiraled into a nightmare, and Karen couldn't help but wonder how she had ended up in this predicament. She had always prided herself on being a good neighbor, following the HOA's rules and regulations to the letter, but now it seemed that her compliance had been her downfall. As she sat there, lost in thought, Karen's gaze fell upon a framed photograph of her family, her husband, their 2 children, and their beloved golden retriever. The image filled her with a renewed sense of purpose and determination. She couldn't let the HOA take this from her, not without a fight. Gripping the bat tighter, Karen rose from her chair and began pacing the room, her mind working overtime to devise a plan. She knew that the HOA wouldn't give up easily, and she needed to be one step ahead of them if she had any hope of protecting her property. Suddenly, an idea struck her, and she hurried to the kitchen, rummaging through the drawers until she found what she was looking for, a set of keys. These weren't just any keys, however. They belonged to the small shed in her backyard, the one that housed a veritable arsenal of her husband's power tools and other heavy equipment. A grim smile spread across Karen's face as she clutched the keys in her hand. If the HOA wanted a fight, she was more than ready to give them one. With newfound determination, Karen strode towards the back door, the old baseball bat still firmly in her grasp. As she stepped outside, she could see the remnants of the bulldozer's path, the once lush lawn now a scarred and battered landscape. Gritting her teeth, Karen made her way to the shed, the keys jingling in her hand. She quickly unlocked the door and stepped inside, her eyes immediately drawn to the array of power tools and equipment that lined the shelves. Without hesitation, Karen grabbed a large, industrial-grade chainsaw and hefted it in her hands, feeling the weight of the machine as she tested its heft. A grim sense of satisfaction washed over her as she pictured the destruction she could unleash with this powerful tool. Stepping back outside, Karen made her way towards the edge of her property, where the bulldozer had left its mark. Revving the chainsaw to life, she began cutting through the tires that she had used to block the machine's path, sending shreds of rubber and clouds of dust into the air. As the roar of the chainsaw filled the air, Karen could see the HOA members begin to gather once more, their faces a mixture of shock and alarm. Susan, the HOA president, rushed towards her, her hands raised in a futile attempt to stop the destruction. "Karen, what do you think you're doing?" she cried, her voice shrill with panic. Karen's reply was cold and unyielding. "I'm taking back what's mine," she growled, her eyes narrowed with determination. Without warning, Karen turned the chainsaw towards the newly constructed pathway, the blade biting into the freshly laid concrete with a deafening roar. The HOA members scrambled to get out of the way, their shouts and curses filling the air as they watched helplessly as Karen's destructive rampage continued. As the pathway crumbled beneath the relentless onslaught of the chainsaw, Karen felt a surge of triumph. She had drawn a line in the sand, and she was willing to go to any lengths to defend her property and her way of life. With the pathway in ruins, Karen turned her attention to the bulldozer itself, her thumb hovering over the chainsaw's trigger as she prepared to unleash her full fury upon the machine that had threatened to take everything she held dear.